let me pick up here. Is that okay? Because we have not. Okay. I said when I introduced myself, I think the medical model is not enough to treat ADHD kids. And sometimes it's even hurtful or damaging. If we take the words ADHD, just leave it. D in English means disorder. S in German means syndrome. Disorder, syndrome are terminologies for illnesses. And I say ADHD is not an illness. And she started by describing her son. I want to describe his character. Yes, ADHD, ADD is a character trait which goes with many genetic loci. And it is the situation, or I cannot say diagnosis because for me it's not a diagnosis. It's a personality diagnosis, if anything. It's not a disease. And if you look at the psychiatric conditions, ADHD, autism are the two, I say now syndromes, are the two situations, psychological situations, which are mostly genetically inherited. And it is very clear that ADHD is inherited. And if something is inherited, we shouldn't just try to make a different person out of it. But if you go now to the school system has the task to normalize, to socialize kids, and they go according to a certain model. And the Swiss school especially straightforward, trying to normalize, because we think these kids cannot survive in society. But as she says, in society, in business, one wants these kids because they're creative. Now, why are they creative? They're also very sensitive. We have translated the syndrome into sensibility. They're highly sensitive. They sense immediately what goes on emotionally. And sometimes they get hurt and they react impulsively. And then one only sees the aggressiveness they have, but one doesn't see how they have been hurt. They have another trait, another strength. They are highly motivated by their own interest. If the teacher is boring, if the subject is boring, they go away, they dream, they think of something else, they look out of the window. If they are not well entertained, they go away. They lose contact, they cannot concentrate. So-called normal kids, they can concentrate even if the teacher is a little boring. But these kids, they quickly go to their own interests. And one says the attention deficit, there we have the same words. The attention deficit only comes apparent if it's not interesting. So they cannot focus. They cannot focus if it's not interesting enough. If they find their own interest, their own focus, they're hyper-focused. So you have researchers among them, you have explorers, you have entertainers, you have entrepreneurs, you have very interesting people who have ADHD. But they only make it if they go through the school system. And yes, the Swiss school system should be changed. And I then, as a psychiatrist, I get many of these damaged kids through our system. And our system gets much more legalized, and everything is defined, and everything is defined by algorithm, etc., etc. And this goes totally against the personality of these kids. So I think we have to do something, and in Switzerland, that the school system is more tolerant towards these kids, because we destroy talents. And I went to a gymnasium, Kantonsschule in Aarau, and Einstein was a student there. we had his grades in our history book, and they almost threw him out of the school because he probably had dyslexia. He was not so good in languages. He was good in mathematics, of course, physics, etc., but not good in languages. And if you are 4 degrees below what the average you should get, you are being thrown out. They didn't throw him out. He was kept, and now he became a Nobel Prize winner. In the school, there's a picture of him, and he says he's very grateful for this school, that this school has had such a tolerant attitude. And this is something we should promote in schools. And I totally agree with you that we should look at the strengths and not at the weaknesses. But the medical system works with weaknesses. We fight against the weakness, we fight against deficits, we fight against illnesses. And if you handle ADHD kid or ADD kid, then you should first focus on the strengths. And if you can focus on the strengths, the child gets self-security, self-assurance, self-worth, and then you can hang on the more difficult things, the more difficult, the weaknesses, and it will pull them along. But often, educational system goes the way that if, for example, they're good in football, but bad in languages, they say you cannot go to football if you don't have a 5 in German. That doesn't work. You should go more to football, then you can concentrate better. One has even observed that after the gym class, all the kids, but especially ADHD kids, those who are hyperactive, can perform better. The ADD kids, they are not so hyperactive, they're hyperactive in their mind. So maybe they should go to research classes or invent something or construct a machine or something, and then they can focus on that, because they are really able to hyper-focus on what they are interested in, what they like. What else can I say? Yeah, if these children are not treated adequately to their character, to their personality, they get a bad self-esteem and they become psychiatrically ill. And I have observed over 40 years how ADHD kids develop. I look at families, I can look at the grandparents, and I see all the symptoms of ADHD. And if they are not treated well, they develop psychiatric illnesses. And there's even a research done, these so-called GVA studies, GVAs, genome-wide association studies. And they have only taken 4 diagnostic criteria, and that was schizophrenia, manic depressive or bipolar disease, deep depression, and autism, and ADHD. And then the psychiatrists were very surprised that these very different categories, psychiatric categories, that they all have the same gene loci, which are different from the normal people. And one hasn't followed that pathway, but for me it's very clear. It's the ADHD which gives the genes, and the environment makes for the different diagnostic. One could observe in prisons, ADHD kids, especially boys, because they are aggressive. When they get hurt, they are highly sensitive, they get hurt, and then they defend themselves with aggression. When they are aggressive, one only looks at their aggressive part, but not at their sensitive part. One never asks them, why did you get hurt, and why did you have to defend yourself in such an aggressive way? So they end up in the court system, in the judiciary system, they end up in prisons. And in prisons, you spend a lot of money and you try to, again, make a normal person out of them, which is impossible. So with animals, we say we have to keep animals in a species, in a condition that is good for that species. And I say people should also be educated in a way that suits them. And we cannot normalize. And as we have said, in business one needs these creative people because they can think out of the box. Their brain also matures a little later, or maybe never completely, so they keep their creativity, while other people lose it. All kids are to some extent creative, but you can lose it when you become an adult if you're not allowed to use your creativity. So if we put these kids into a box, we cause a lot of healthcare costs, we cause judiciary costs, and we cause social costs. And that's why we start, or will start, this, where is it now? Stärken from an early age. That's why we want to start this prevention campaign with ADHD, ADHS, we say in Switzerland, plus, 20 plus. We want to introduce into the school system, into educational systems, this tolerance that people learn how to treat these kids. The parents have to learn it, teachers have to learn it, the kindergarten teachers have to learn it. And I think it doesn't take that much. And if you say, not everybody has the money to pay for a private school. I think the very normal schools should be able to treat these kids. And we have now in Switzerland integrated school systems. That means we should integrate mentally handicapped, we should integrate physically handicapped. But the school system has the biggest problem with ADHD kids because they show through behavior. They are challenged to the teachers, so they give up, and they are being stigmatized and pathologized. One puts them into the medical system. And I, as a psychiatrist, as a doctor, I'm very much against putting them into this track of illness. But it's very difficult. Psychiatry, medicine is a discipline, and we psychiatrists, we are not really, what would I say, a real subject. We only talk to people, and this is not so much worth. Surgery, all the research now in genetics, these are all physical things. One can see, one can measure. And in our field, one cannot measure that well. We have to observe, we have to find pattern recognitions, etc., etc. We let the computers now recognize patterns, but I think as a human being, one is much better in recognizing human patterns and then combining what fits and what doesn't fit. But psychiatrists want to be accepted by medicine, so they go by tests, mechanical things, genetics, etc., etc. And we lose our skills, our trait. So I think we psychiatrists should work much more with the individual, but then with the environment. And epigenetics helps us now, because in epigenetics many research results come out that the environment plays a very big role in our development. I make now a little shift. In evolution, Darwin is the founder of the theory of evolution. Lamarck was one who had always the idea that the genes are being influenced by the environment. And when I went to medical school, one laughed about that and said, oh, Lamarckian theory, that's out of date. And now, through epigenetics, it comes back. And the brain is an organ that is mostly influenced by genes that can be changed epigenetically. And in all the epigenetic influences, the environment plays a very big role. And that's why we try to launch this, this preventive campaign. And my idea now for Takeda. Takeda is a Japanese firm, isn't it? I have traveled through Japan. I have 2 grandsons who are half Japanese and half Swiss. And if I observe Japan, I have read a book on ADHD all around the world. And that Japanese people, they are against artificial things, against medication. So one gives much less medication in Japan than, for example, in the United States. They want to leave the human being the way that human being is. But, of course, the human being has to be socialized. And in Japan, they have very strong rules how one should be socialized. And people accept that, and they go with it, and they are very disciplined. Japanese people are very disciplined. So since Japan has a long tradition in socializing people, I would like to tell Takeda that they make a brochure about do's and don'ts with ADHD kids. That means that one hands out or one constructs a little brochure, and you can put in all the do's and don'ts. And there are very clear do's and don'ts with ADHD kids. I cannot tell them all now, but you can ask me after. And I think that would be very helpful. And these do's and don'ts, one could then hand out to the schools, one could hand out to the parents, and maybe we can have a little impact on the school system and on society. I am a specialist in schizophrenia too, and since I see the connection between ADHD and schizophrenia, I've written a book about it. And in schizophrenia, for a while, family therapy and working with the environment was very much at fashion. And then several pharmaceutical companies have made such brochures. Now it's not so much in fashion anymore. At that time, family therapy was much in fashion. That's also a little bit lost. Medicine, or the medical system has lost interest in that. But I think it would be time to make a brochure for do's and don'ts, how to handle ADHD kids. And that, at the same time, of course, is an advertisement for the company. And then you would also have something for Japan, because it's not just medication, it's a social guide. And when, for example, when you go to Japan, they have certain rules, and there are books about it, and Japanese people are very polite. They always bow. And when you want something from them and they cannot adjust to your demand, they say, we try our best. Translated, that means forget about it. So we could make a brochure, or you, your firm could make a brochure to give a little guideline for how to handle ADHD kids. That is what I want to say, and now you can ask me questions.
First,